Elizabeth, what's good? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Wow, I got this done this morning, but didn't have time to get the video. So yeah, we got the table of contents looking off of your sheet that you sent me. Leadership crisis, the first page. You know, I would just like to point out to say, man, that I didn't have very good leaders, and I think that for me, growing up in the projects, growing up in a poor environment, that people that didn't have success in their own life, it was hard for them to, relay successful tactics without, with the exception of the common, don't drop out of school, go to school, and don't do drugs and that type of stuff. I think something that you could write here is um, some people tell you what you shouldn't do, but a good leader shows you what you should do. It's cool. I shouldn't do drugs and I shouldn't drop out of school, but what are some of the things that I need to practice to get better? So, one of the quotes I want to use right here in chapter one is from Tim Elmer's book called Habitudes by Dr. Tim Elmer. I'll send that kind of with this recording. But he's the one who mentioned, are leaders born or are leaders made? And the answer is yes. They are born and they are made. And but that whole thing with the capital L leader is a CEO, a pastor, some type of great entrepreneur. But other leaders are a school teacher, a mom, a high school coach. That's maybe it could be a small case L, and yeah, I think there should be enough there to get a page out of, um, and so the second chapter is a spiritual call to leadership, and so looking at Samuel was pretty awesome. As Samuel was called, I think I got it here. Do I? No. Samuel was called in Samuel chapter 3. I do. He was called in Samuel chapter 3. It was a spiritual call. So we know as you look at Samuel chapter 3, Eli, he heard his name called and he went to Eli, and Eli said, man, if you hear the name again after the third time, you know the story, respond, here am I. So there's a half a page we're trying to get here, but the reference there in Samuel 3 is that God called him personally. And it's important for us to know that if you're going to operate in spiritual leadership, you need to be, cognizant or aware of that God is the one who called you um, originally. And so it's been said, dance with the one who brought you. Like if somebody brings you to a dance, dance with them. So if he called you, don't try to get your spiritual wisdom. Don't try to get your leadership wisdom from secular groups, though they can be beneficial, but get it from God, hear from God. The next person was David. David was approached by a prophet of God, by a man of God who had the Spirit of God upon him, and that's in 1 Samuel 16. David was about 10 or 13 years old, and the man of God came and said, "It's not your brothers, it's not the mighty, it's not the strong, it's not the oldest, but it's who God calls." And so David became aware that God was calling him at a young age, and it was a spiritual call. And we also see that he had ability, that he killed the bear and the lion, and God groomed him up for the next facet of his ministry. The next person is the Apostle Paul. We see that there was a spiritual call, man had raised them even in the midst of religion. And so I think some of us could be born in the church, but don't really understand the call of leadership by God. And so Paul was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He was very educated in Judaism, but in Acts chapter 9, God knocked him off of his high horse and he received his spiritual call. Now, one of the things that we could transition to in is that he received his spiritual call, and it wasn't one to pomp and circumstance. It wasn't to glitter and glare. It wasn't to the limelight. He was called, and as Ananias came to him in that later in that chapter, he said, "Man, I must show you the things that you must suffer." And so your calling and your spiritual call is not always to, be the king or prophet, but to be a martyr or to be a burden carrier for others. And so that transitions into, the other half page of Jesus receiving his spiritual call. And you could look at that in Luke chapter 1, 31st verse and 32nd, where the angel is speaking to Mary saying, man, this is Jesus. He's going to be born, and he's going to be a leader, and he's going to, lead people out of sin and lead people into the truth of God's word. And so his spiritual call was brought aware, but we also know that his spiritual call called for his death, right? Because he had to carry the cross. So I think again, that whole limelight is to lead is to give yourself up wholly and completely to another. So then the third, fourth, and fifth chapter. So the third chapter is going to be looking at the Moses called to spiritual leadership to be a leader. He was called as well as as the other four guys. Moses was called. He had an encounter with the burning bush. That's in Exodus chapter 3. And he had that amazing encounter with the Lord. And, he responded. And so fewer things there is that he understood from the giddy up from Jump Street that it was a holy call. He was told to take off his sandals, that the ground that he was standing on was holy ground, and that he was to go back and confront Pharaoh. So sometimes your leadership will send you back to areas where you've seen that things weren't done right. And so Moses went back to restore those things and make them right in the Lord. And so the next chapter is, Moses in Exodus 13. His nature was to go up and spend time in the mountain. And so when you call by God like Moses was, and he had that whole encounter with the burning bush, and he responded, he took up the staff, and he went back. This could even still be in that chapter 4. Moses called to spiritual leadership. Um, that fourth page. He got the call and he operated in it. He got the staff, so it wasn't just like natural ability, it was a supernatural calling with supernatural ability, and man, delivered the people. Now when the people were delivered, going to that next page, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth page, or the fifth chapter, going to the mountain, he had to go back and find out, just like he heard from the bush, from the Lord. He had to find out, what do they do from there. So sometimes your spiritual calling will show you how to start, but then you got to keep coming to God so you could know how to finish what the Lord has started. And so when we see the whole thing in Exodus 13, the cloud by the day and the fire by night. So to me, it shows that God uses different elements to lead you. It's not always the fire, it's not always the cloud. It's not always a burning bush. It's not always the staff. There's some things that you got to be aware of, that like, how is God presenting himself to you? So this whole page is supposed to be about um, spiritual leadership, how to be led by the Spirit of God in leadership. And you got to see how the Spirit is leading you and what does that look like. Um, so yeah, I think that's that. Then the sixth page is hearing from God, and that whole, when we hear from the Lord, um, like with Jethro. I think I'm running out of space in my computer. So anyway, he heard from God um, through Jethro. Jethro spoke to him. That's in Exodus 18. And so spiritual leadership to continue. If you're a leader, a great sign of true leadership is that you make leaders. And so we see at that moment, Jethro is telling, hey man, you led the people. God's done some supernatural things in your life. But here on this sixth page, we want to start pointing out that part of leadership is that you start building up other people for leadership. You're building them up for to be all that God has called them to be. And so Jethro told him, what you do here, if you continue to just be the man and be the number one leader and the only leader, then you're going to wear yourself out and you're going to wear the people out. But if you assign others to that place of leadership, then you're going to begin to see the benefit of how the people are getting ministered to, and you're not worn out. So be led of the Spirit so you don't burn out. You're supposed to be lit up, not burnt out. All right. So those are the 6 pages, and you could break them up into those chapters how you want. I'm gonna send another recording that'll have the next 6 pages.